All India Radio, Bangalore and Bhadravati. English in India. The speaker is the well-known novelist and short story writer Sri R.K. Narayan.
Call it what you like. Link language, a window opening on to a wider world, the language of the imperialists, or any other name. It is still the language which has proved most convenient. You can get along with it in most parts of this or any country in the world, in spite of rules, regulations, and directives, or even an actual ban. It is bound to survive. Even if barricades and checkposts are erected at the boundaries of any state, the language will still seep in, being ubiquitous and possessing an enormous vitality and staying power. And so I will go on with this talk on the assumption that English is going to be around in one form or another. It may not be as the first language, but as a language available to those who seek or prefer it. I am often asked why I write in English rather than in Tamil or Kannada. But I have felt tongue-tied before such a question. Frankly, I do not know. I am perhaps in the category of those that have a personal preference to it. In those golden days, about 40 years ago, when I began to write, no one questioned, and language had not become a sensitive issue. People spoke and wrote any language suited to their needs and circumstances, and no one spent too much thought on that as a debatable point. Historical causes brought the English language onto the shores of India and spread it and conferred on it enough importance to make it official. English held its rank as the first language for over a century, but it created a social and cultural gap between those who knew English and those who did not. It has to be admitted that the first language, for all its importance and status, did not sink to the grassroots. It remained the language of the educated classes and acted as a barrier between the masses and the classes, necessitating, for instance, the presence of a translator between the ICS official and the peasant. Although the civilian must have had a formal training in the language of his district. When we became politically self-conscious, our leaders felt that this dichotomy should be ended if there was to be harmony and free communication between all classes. It was no doubt an admirable aim, but the steps adopted to achieve it did not quite succeed, since they all started on the hypothesis that all would be well if the English language were to be exiled, banished, and ostracized. But English could neither be dislodged nor destroyed, since it displayed a strange vitality and staying power. In areas where it struck roots, it still flourishes in spite of every form of disapproval and discouragement. Its protagonists favor it for a variety of reasons. It is understood widely and helps a great deal of interstate communication, although statistically it may be insignificant. But one must remember that even a minute percentage of 600 million amounts to a great deal. As the figures of circulation of the English language newspapers in our country indicate, we have to reckon with this fact that English is with us and will be with us, whatever its status, for a variety of practical purposes and reasons, and also, as in my case, because one loves the language. When this fact is admitted, it seems just as well that the excellence of standards is maintained. Of late, there has been a falling off of standards in the teaching and learning of English. Now we have to think of measures to remedy this situation. First and foremost, our writers have to evolve a brand of English which keeps close to our own idiom of thinking. I am not suggesting that it should be what is disparagingly termed Indian English. I mean a real brand of English language suited to our needs, just as the Americans have evolved their own idiom and usage. One cannot order such a situation overnight. It's something that has to germinate and ripen in its own time, and only then can it reflect the details and quality of our lives and convey the texture and tone of India. Next, every step should be taken to reform English spelling and place it on a rational foundation. George Bernard Shaw pleaded for a spelling reform all his life and left his estate to the Spelling Reform Society, amounting to £1,000,000 or more. What the society has achieved with all that amount of money at their disposal cannot be measured yet, but the fact remains that English spelling remains stubbornly irrational still. For example, take the word knowledge. It continues to be padded with unnecessary and silent consonants and proves an embarrassment to a learner. Where is the need for the letter L in walk or talk or could or would? Shaw to a certain extent eliminated the unnecessary L in some of his writing, but the task is stupendous. Irrational spelling is deep rooted and widespread and is not easily reformed. Americans have to a certain extent revolutionized this aspect of the language in their own way. Program spelt Program and labor Labor and center Center are spelt as they sound, freed from unnecessary vowels and consonants. Our first requirement would be to produce a new brand of dictionary of English spelling and propagate it far and wide. On the basis of reformed spelling, which should be closest to the phonetic values, books have to be written, starting with the primers for lower standards. Apart from the words, the contents of such books should also be Indian. Stories with an Indian background and familiar characters must be written in a straightforward style. The intimacy felt with the locale and characters in a composition will go a long way in establishing the language in the heart of its readers. In my school days, all our textbooks were imported from England, and the lessons were all framed with a British background, starting with rhymes in which Jack and Jill figured, or the black sheep with its wool. Every lesson sounded alien. We used to comment among ourselves, would people really call themselves Jack or Jill? And what sort of people are they? And then the word pail, in which they went up to fetch water. What was a pail? We looked long and hard at the illustrations, trying to make out the nature of this fantastic utensil. Our masters were equally bewildered, but discouraged us from questioning them too much. Further, when we came upon an apple pie, from the illustrations we could make out that it was some sort of eatable. But what an apple or a pie was could not be explained by any teacher in that remote school where we studied, and where a mango or a guava was better known than an apple. And of course, pie was something of a puzzle. In those days, a pie meant the smallest coin, but here we found it being eaten. Even our arithmetic books took a long time to Indianize the problems with rupees and annas instead of pounds and shillings. And it took years before a measure of rice was mentioned in place of bushels of oats. Nowadays, of course, our universities have introduced definite courses of study in Indian writing in English, covering poetry, drama, and fiction, which portray contemporary and familiar life. This is a step in the right direction, but we have to introduce a similar course at the primary and secondary levels too. In addition to spelling reform, we must also go back to the basic English system, which provided about 800 words, the mastery of which helped one to learn the English language easily. I have so far spoken of matters pertaining to the language as it should be written and taught, so that a proper grounding is obtained for a learner. However, for advanced tastes in the language and for those who love it, nothing need be done more than make the treasures of English literature available in inexpensive editions, perhaps with special exposition and explanation, so that not only the students of literature but a common lover of the language may have access to the delights of English language and literature.
You have just heard Dr. R.K. Narayan, the well-known writer, on English in India. This broadcast came to you from All India Radio, Bangalore.